The Pope died last Monday. Silence, tributes, masses around the world. But nobody dares to ask what he took with him to the grave. Well, I know. I saw. What if I hadn't died and been pulled out of my body that freezing night in Pittsburgh? That secret would have died with him. The Vatican always knew. The Pope knew. And it wasn't just about past mistakes or hushed-up scandals. It's something much deeper, something spiritual, something apocalyptic. My name is Elijah Carter. Former priest, professor of theology, a man who spent half his life studying the scriptures and the other half trying to forget them. But I couldn't imagine that heaven itself would force me to remember. The pain started during a lecture. I was talking about the decline of institutional faith when my chest closed as if a hand from beyond had sunk its claws into my heart. I fell. The lights in the auditorium turned into figures. The sound became distant. And suddenly, the world went dark. I thought, that's it. It's over. But it's not over. My body was on the floor, and I was above him, as if I had detached myself from the flesh, floating with a strange consciousness. I saw my face pale. I heard the muffled screams, the paramedics trying to bring me back. But something bigger had already pulled me. The ceiling dissolved. Time doubled. And an invisible portal, one that my mortal eyes could never see, opened before me. It was like falling inside myself, a tunnel made of living shadow and ancient memory. Voices called me by a name I never knew I had. It wasn't Elijah. It was something older, more intimate, as if my spirit had an eternal name. I was pulled down this hallway. I felt scared, but also a strange peace. And then a flash. Not just any light, but a presence. He was there. Jesus. But not like with icons. Not in a white robe with open arms. He was fire and tenderness. A universe within eyes that knew everything. Everything about me. Everything about the world. Everything about what the Vatican hides. He looked at me, and he said, Elijah, you were chosen to see. And in that instant, reality exploded. Was swallowed up by visions that no human being is prepared to endure. The phrase still echoed inside me. You were chosen to see. And before I could respond, the light around Jesus expanded like a silent explosion. I felt my spirit being pushed, not with violence, but with the inevitable force of a truth that would not accept being postponed any longer. I saw a huge door open in the middle of nowhere. There was no ground, no sky, just a space without definition, where time seemed to bow before eternity. Behind that door, the Vatican. But not the tourist Vatican, with photos and televised masses, was a hidden spiritual dimension where secret acts left visible burning traces like black stains on the fabric of faith. I walked, or was led, into a vast, vaulted hall with columns that reached infinity. Everything was gold. Everything was glitter. But there was something wrong with that splendor. It hurts in the eyes of the soul. The air was thick, as if the environment itself was trying to stifle any pure thought. There were men there. Men in white, red, purple cassocks. Some I recognized from newspapers. Others I just felt powerful, hierarchical, feared figures. They sat on thrones surrounded by sacred symbols. But what did they do? It was not sacred. Glasses of black wine, distorted prayers, chants in languages that my spirit recognized as ancient and dangerous. In the center of the hall, a book, old, huge, chained to a pedestal. Jesus approached me and pointed at him. His voice without sound entered straight into my being. They hide the truth here, Elijah. I approached. Each step seemed to weigh tons. When I touched the book, images leapt out of it like fire. A document sealed centuries ago which contradicted the official version of salvation. A gospel never revealed. a secret about the true nature of Christ, not the Christ domesticated by institutions, but the living Christ who walks among the poor who never wanted thrones. Saw secret meetings, I saw vows of silence, saw papacies built in exchange for political and spiritual favors. And I saw the Pope, the same one who died last week, sitting in front of this book, crying. Yes, crying. Why, he knew. And he knew he couldn't undo what had already been sealed for centuries. But then Jesus spoke again, looking at me with a pain that pierced the universe. They don't represent me. And in that moment I understood. The church that I knew, the one that formed me, the one in which I formed others, had moved away. The temple was standing, but the Spirit no longer lived there. An explosion of light swept through the hall. Everything went out. And when the vision reconfigured itself, I was already somewhere else. An even darker place. When the light disappeared, I found myself enveloped by a dense, pulsating, almost living darkness. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a presence, a whispering silence. Little by little, the darkness dissipated, like smoke pushed by an invisible wind. What appeared in front of me seemed impossible, an underground room beneath the Vatican, but outside of time, outside of Earth, a spiritual space that no one will ever see with carnal eyes. The walls were made of damp stone, covered in symbols I didn't recognize, non-Christians but mixed, corrupted. A black stone altar occupied the center of the room. Above him, a golden cross, inverted. And then I felt it. Presences. They were not angels, and neither do men. They were ancient creatures with indefinite shapes, shrouded in shadows that crawled like serpents in agony. They didn't speak, but they mocked, and each laugh was a knife to my soul. I watched in shock as men in clerical robes, some with the bishop's ring still shining on their finger, approached the altar. Their faces were blurred, as if heaven had refused to register them. They knelt in the face of darkness. What kind of pact was that? Why those men, representatives of the sacred on earth, why were there? Jesus, in silence, appeared at my side. He didn't stop the scene. It just made me see. And his sadness was greater than anything I had ever felt. They traded light for authority. They made my name a throne, and then a trade. The surrounding creatures smiled. Yes, smile, because the lie was working. I saw documents being signed in blood. I saw theological decisions not based on truth but on the fear of losing control over the people. I saw the birth of dogmas that were never said by Jesus. And I saw the angels, outside, expelled, excluded from the spiritual councils of the church itself. I cried, or tried. I don't know if it's possible to cry without eyes, but my soul was torn with regret. Why didn't anyone tell you this? Why did they let the world believe that everything there was holy? Jesus responded without words, just with a gesture, pointing to a figure in the corner of the room. An elderly man in a white cassock kneeling with his hands on his face. Father, the same one who died a few days ago. He was there, not as a leader, but as a prisoner of his own silence. And then the room shook. Something was about to be revealed, something even deeper, more devastating. The floor of the room shook. The creatures retreated. The inverted cross cracked in the center as if the very spiritual structure of it was beginning to crumble, not by an external force, but by the weight of lies sustained for centuries. Jesus looked at me. His eyes said, "You haven't seen everything yet?" And in a blink of consciousness, I was transported again. This time there was no floor, no ceiling, no form, just a huge space and screams. Thousands, maybe millions. Not cries of condemnation, but of confusion, anguish, despair, floating. Around me were souls, human souls, trapped in a kind of vibrational purgatory. They all had something in common. They died believing in a faith that never freed them. They were faithful. Church people, Catholics, evangelicals, religious people from everywhere. But there was a void in their eyes, as if they had spent their entire lives searching for a God they had never found, because they showed it to them with masks. We pray, we follow the rituals, we obey. Why are we still here? I heard a soul say, even without a voice. It was there that Jesus spoke, this time directly to my spirit. Because they taught them about me, but they didn't show me. I saw images floating in this space, children abused and silenced, young people kicked out of churches for asking too many questions, women humiliated by sacred hierarchies, men who gave everything for God and were left alone in their hour of pain. What hurt the most was seeing that these souls were not condemned by their sins but by the manipulation of faith. The church took them away from me with their pride. They turned salvation into a system. And then, in the center of this spiritual valley, there appeared a library made of light, or rather memories. Jesus led me there, and he pointed to a book that shined brighter than the others. It was written, "The Gospel of Love That Has Been Silenced." It was a message straight from the heart of Christ, a teaching that, if it had been followed from the beginning, would have freed billions. But it was hidden, deleted, because it didn't give power, it didn't bring gold, it didn't build empires. The Vatican knew, and Jesus, with pain in his eyes, said, "They didn't hide it from me, they hid it from you." The floor of spiritual purgatory shook. Souls began to move as if recognizing that lost gospel. An echo of hope was reborn, but there was still more. Jesus looked at me with infinite seriousness and said, "Now you will see the future, if they do not awaken." Jesus' words still echoed inside me. Now you will see the future, if they do not awaken. Before I could ask what he meant by them, I was engulfed in a stream of gold and gray light, not gentle, but stormy. I felt like I was being thrown into a wave made of time. When the current finally stopped, I found myself in a city that I knew, but that no longer existed. New York, burnt, silent, in ruins. Skyscrapers like metal skeletons, abandoned churches, banks closed, supermarkets looted. But the scariest thing wasn't the scenery. It was the total absence of faith. There was no prayer. There was no hope. People walked like shadows, dry eyes, empty hearts. The love was gone. Jesus was by my side, but now he wasn't smiling. He cried. The tears fell, but they didn't touch the floor. They evaporated into thin air, as if the world had forgotten how to receive God's touch. "This is the world without my truth," he said. A world that turned religion into ritual and forgot love. A world where the Vatican protected the gold, but hid the light. I saw multitudes in religious wars, but not by faith, for control, for politics, for power. I saw church leaders, some with the papal ring, signing alliances with corrupt governments, using faith as currency for manipulation. And then, I saw something that chilled my spirit, a new religion emerging, beautiful on the outside, perfect, organized, universal. But it was false. It was a spiritual Frankenstein, stitched together with excerpts from different doctrines, but without a soul. Jesus was not in it. There was no cross. There was no sacrifice. Just aesthetics, performance, and promises of peace in exchange for total submission. I saw children being taught that God was just a concept. I saw ancient priests being silenced. I saw the people hungry for something real, but being fed with recycled illusion. Jesus took me to one last place in that vision, a cave hidden under an ancient chapel. Inside, a group of people were crying, but their tears were not of despair. They were of reverence. They had a book in their hands, the same one I saw before, the silenced Gospel of Love. There were few, but they were true, and God was with them. Jesus looked at me and said, "This is the remnant. If the truth is revealed, they will multiply." And then he pointed at me. "But to do that, you need to talk." A wave of light began to pull me back, but I felt that the revelation was not yet complete. The light that was pulling me began to vibrate. It wasn't a return. It was a new descent. This time, back in time. Everything around me started to spin. The ruins of the future have disappeared, replaced by ancient landscapes, desert, walled cities, crowds in sandals and cloaks. I was being taken back to the beginning, and then I saw it. The council. Not the 4th century Council of Nicaea, not the one in the books. It was earlier, spiritual, hidden. A secret meeting between religious leaders, the first who understood that the name of Jesus could be used for something beyond salvation, power. I saw men gathered in a dark room beneath an ancient temple, and there he was, a scroll rolled up with words of Christ that never made it into the Bible. Simple words, revolutionaries. Jesus said there, "The kingdom is within you, and no man should rule over another's soul." Those words never reached the hands of the people. One of the men, austere-looking, dressed in authority, took the parchment, read it with cold eyes, and said, "If we teach this, we lose the people." Another responded, "Then we will only teach what is necessary. The rest now will be ours." It was at that moment that I saw the birth of the system. The truth of Jesus, which was free, alive, and accessible, was crushed, filtered, boxed. And I saw the Spirit of Christ moving away from the room. Jesus was next to me, watching the scene. There was deep pain on his face, but he wasn't surprised. He just muttered, "They chose the throne, I, the cross." From that moment on, I saw a spiritual red line form, a secret lineage of manipulation that would span centuries, from the Roman Empire to European crowns, from golden altars to hidden gold, from papal silence to institutional lies. And all these decisions were made in the name of God. I saw every person who tried to reveal the truth be silenced. I saw prophets being labeled heretics. I saw the fire of bonfires and the ink of editors who tore up sacred pages. And then Jesus showed me something that chilled me inside, the face of a young seminarian with pure eyes about to be corrupted. He looked at me directly. It was me. "First of all," Jesus said, "that's why you were chosen to see, because you almost became one of them." I was speechless. There was no longer any way to escape. The truth had been shown. But Jesus was not finished yet. He now wanted to show me where there was still light, even in the midst of so much darkness. After showing how the truth was silenced, I thought Jesus was going to let me sink into that despair, an immense, almost unbearable pain for all that was lost. But he looked at me tenderly, and then for the first time smiled. "Not everything was erased, Elijah. I hid my light, where they would never think to look." Suddenly, we were transported. The landscape in front of me was transformed. I left the shadows of secret councils, the golden halls of institutional religion, and I was taken to simple places. Very simple. I saw a dark room with a musty smell. Inside, an elderly woman kneels on an old mattress. She didn't have a Bible in her hands, just a candle and the name of Jesus on your lips. His room was the altar. Her tears were incense, and God was there, so brightly that the air shone around her. Jesus pointed and said, "She never had a position, she never went to Rome, but she knows my heart." Then I was taken to a forgotten village in the mountains of South America. A group of young people sat in the shade of a tree, reading an ancient passage from a forbidden gospel. They laughed, cried, prayed, without rituals, without imposed doctrine. Their faith was like fire in dry wood, alive, warm, free. "They are my church," said Jesus. I saw a beggar in New Orleans share the only bread he had with another man hungrier than himself. I saw a woman hug her own son's killer and say, "I don't understand, but I forgive." These moments, these souls, were like beacons in the darkness, small flames hidden beneath the ashes of the corrupted temple. Jesus took me to a ruined monastery, where 3 monks had been praying silently for years. They did not celebrate Mass, they didn't write books, they just listened. And in that silence, heaven spoke. I saw children who had never heard about religion, but who knew how to love. I saw atheists who never uttered the name God, but who they lived the gospel with more purity than many priests. Jesus then looked at me, and his eyes burned. The kingdom was never a place, it was always a choice, and my light never belonged to temples nor thrones. It belongs to love. I was paralyzed, because now I saw clearly God's plan was never destroyed. It was just camouflaged by the human structure. But this light is still alive, hidden in the invisible, waiting to wake up. And Jesus still wanted to show me what would happen when this light began to break through the walls of false religion. Jesus stretched out his hand, and in that gesture I felt something that crossed me. Movement. The light started to move. I saw the little flames, the ones that were hidden in poor homes, in forgotten hearts, in silent souls, begin to connect. One here, another there, like invisible threads of light being stitched together by a divine force. In just a few moments, it was as if the entire world was trembling inside. I saw churches being abandoned, not out of hate, but out of thirst. People leaving rituals, dogmas, titles, and back to the essence. They began to meet in squares, houses, mountains, basements, without hierarchies, without pulpits. There was no name on these meetings. There was no visible leadership. But there was Jesus. He walked among them, not as an idol, but as the invisible and present brother, the Christ who lives, not the one who has been institutionalized. And then I saw the thrones shake. The Vatican, with its centuries-old walls, began to feel spiritual cracks. I saw cardinals gathered in panic trying to understand why the temples were empty, why tithes stopped coming in, why the faithful no longer obeyed. They shouted, "We are losing the herd." But what they lost, it was never theirs. It was from God. And God was taking him back. I saw documents burning. I saw reliquaries being emptied. I saw secret libraries opening as if a spiritual hand broke the seals of history. And then I heard a sound that I will never forget. Spiritual chains breaking. It was as if humanity had carried an invisible yoke for centuries, and now suddenly something had been broken. The truth was returning, and not as doctrine, but as a person. Jesus looked at me and said, "This is what happens when my people find me, without intermediaries." At that moment, I saw religious leaders trying to react. Some knelt, repentant. Others became even more rigid, calling assemblies, creating new rules to try to contain what they called rebellion. But it was too late. The rebellion was holy. It was not against God. He was against lying. And when the last cathedral fell silent, I saw something indescribable. Millions of people, in silence, with their eyes closed, feeling God within them for the first time. Jesus looked at me, and in a soft voice he said, "You needed to see this because it's going to be your mission to announce its coming." The revelation was not yet over. He wanted to show me the real heaven, not the one they painted on religious murals, but the one promised to the pure in heart. Jesus touched me on the shoulder so gently that I could barely understand how that gesture could contain the entire universe. And then, in an instant, everything changed. I wasn't taken. I was open. It was as if my spirit expanded until it no longer had a form, until it was no longer a separate I, and became being part of what always called me back. Around me there were no walls, no temples, no crowns. True heaven. It has no dome, no throne. It is a space without time, a faceless presence. But at the same time, everything is alive. Everything is consciousness, love, sound. And sound is made of light. I don't know how to describe it any other way. It was as if every particle vibrated to an invisible melody. A song that one does not hear with the ears but with the soul. And this melody said only one thing: you are loved. You always have been. There was no trial. There were no hierarchical saints. There was no spiritual bureaucracy. The only authority there was love. And love was a person. Jesus. He was in everything. In the light, in the sound, in the vibration, in the fields that danced even without wind. And around, I noticed other presences. Souls, but not like shadows or ghosts. They were conscious. Flames. Some I recognized without knowing how. A brother I lost before I was born. A child I never knew existed. A woman who carried a peace so intense that it made me cry. They all looked at me, and they met me. And then I understood. In heaven, no one needs to explain who they are. Why there we are as God saw us before the world contaminated us. There is no envy, no competition, no comparison. The joy of a soul. It is celebrated by everyone. Else, I felt a peace that doesn't fit into any words, a tenderness that no sermon has ever managed to preach. And I understood something that made me cry spiritually. It's always been available, but religion has made it inaccessible. Jesus took me to a field where colors do not exist as we know them. They were alive, liquid, dancing. Each flower was a note. Every smell was a memory. And in the middle of that field, a tree, huge, golden, whose roots touched dimensions that I could not understand. Jesus said, "This is the tree of life, and it is still alive, even if its pages have been torn out of the books." I fell to my knees, not out of obligation, but why I've never felt so clean, so whole, so me. Heaven is not a place. It's a state of fullness where God stops being belief and becomes the air you breathe. And it was this heaven that they had tried to hide from us. The tree of life swayed gently before me even without wind. Its golden glow seemed to pulse with the heart of the Creator himself. And I, kneeling there, didn't know if I wanted to cry, disappear, or just stay forever. But then the light around me started to change. It didn't decrease. It intensified. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. My time there was running out. Jesus walked to me. His feet did not touch the ground, but it was as if the ground was born where he stepped. He ducked. And once again he called me. Elijah. This name spoken by him, it's like an eternal seal on my soul. You saw what was hidden, he said. You saw the thrones, the lies, the pacts. You saw the lost souls, and those that still carry the light. You have seen the future, if humanity continues to deny the truth. But he also saw heaven as it is, without walls, without titles, without religion. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. The throat of the soul choked by an emotion that does not fit into human language. Jesus continued, "Now you know, and knowing makes you responsible." He stood up, and as he did, all of reality around me flickered like a blown flame. But his voice remained firm within me. They won't believe you right away. Some will mock. Others will accuse you. Some leaders will try to silence you. But that's why you saw it. Because only those who see it have the courage to say what no one wants to hear. A wave of light enveloped me. She was different from everyone else, not welcoming but decisive. The border was close. I saw heaven slowly moving away, like an ocean returning after touching the beach. And I heard, for the last time, his voice. When you come back, don't try to prove it. Just Tell it, the truth speaks for itself. And at that moment, everything went out. The light, I'm about, the time, even myself. But what remained was eternal. The certainty, the love, the mission, and above all, the memory of what the Vatican tried to hide. But not even death could. Keep it a secret. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.